The first thing Gabe did was ask everyone to stop changing things. It was 6:52 on Wednesday evening, 6 minutes after the simulation had rejected Creston Pacific's transfer window label, and 3 people were already opening configuration menus at once. "Nobody touch production settings," Gabe said. Maya froze with one hand over her keyboard. Ethan looked at him. "We are not in production." "I know, but if 5 of us start solving 5 versions of the same problem, we won't know which change fixed it." Ethan considered that, then pointed toward the screen. "Your room." The words were simple, but Gabe felt them. Not because Ethan had surrendered authority. He had not. He was doing something more useful, giving authority to the person closest to the problem. Gabe opened the rejected message and compared it with the successful transfers from the earlier test environment. The scheduling platform had accepted the time, date, terminal code, and movement category. It had rejected one field labeled TW-Reg, the internal shorthand Creston Pacific had used for years to describe a regional transfer window. The upgraded system expected a standardized code. Maya found the documentation first. "There," she said, "Regional Transfer Availability, RTA." "That is almost offensively simple," Ethan said. "Simple is good," Gabe replied. "Simple can still ruin your evening." They created a test copy, changed the label, and sent the same schedule again. At 7:06, the message passed. Nobody celebrated. Gabe did not trust single successes. "Again," he said, "they ran 12 transfers using different ports, time windows, and cargo types. 11 passed. 1 failed because an older warehouse code had the same compatibility issue. Maya found that mapping next. By 8:30, the technical problem had become clear enough to explain on 1 page. The operational problem was larger. Creston Pacific had hundreds of active labels across its internal scheduling system. Most were already aligned with the partner's new standard, but nobody knew whether other outdated terms were hidden in the data. Ethan looked at the clock. "We can search the full code library tonight." Eleanor shook her head. "And verify every result by Thursday morning?" "No." Victoria had been listening from the end of the table. "Then what can we verify?" Gabe pulled the pilot scope onto the screen. "Only what Cebu needs for launch. We don't need to solve the company's entire vocabulary tonight. We need to know whether the first operating phase is safe to run." He highlighted 37 message types. "These are the exchanges the pilot actually uses. Validate these. Build a temporary translation table for anything incompatible. Then schedule the rest of the cleanup as normal implementation work." Ethan gave him a tired smile. "You really dislike solving problems we don't have yet." "I dislike solving them at 2 in the morning because we created them at 7. Maya laughed. The team divided the list. For the next 4 hours, the 9th floor strategy room became less like a corporate office and more like a workshop. Jackets disappeared over chairbacks. Dinner arrived in paper containers. Screens filled with test messages and checkmarks. On a video call from Cebu, a local operations lead named Paolo Serrano walked them through the exact sequence his team would use on launch morning. When Paolo noticed Gabe's surname on the participant list, he asked, "Villanueva, Cebuano?" Gabe smiled. "Born in Cebu City." Paolo switched briefly into Cebuano, asking what district his family came from. Gabe answered, and for 10 seconds the conference room in San Francisco filled with the easy rhythm of a language he usually heard only at home or during calls with relatives. Then Gabe translated the question for the others and returned to the test. Ethan watched without making it into a moment. Gabe appreciated that too. At 11:41, the 37th message passed. Maya leaned back and closed her eyes. "Please tell me we are done." "With the critical path," Gabe said. "That is not the answer I requested." Ethan gathered the printed results. "Go home, both of you." Maya did not argue. Gabe stayed long enough to write the summary for Thursday's partner summit. The conclusion was not dramatic. The system upgrade created manageable compatibility work, but no evidence justified moving the pilot launch. Creston Pacific would maintain the date, add a limited translation layer, and complete the broader code cleanup before Manila entered the sequence. At 12:18, Victoria appeared at the conference room door. You are still here. Gabe saved the document. So are you. Occupational defect. They walked toward the elevators together. Victoria was quiet until the doors closed. Ethan told me you corrected him twice tonight. Only twice. She looked at him. Gabe smiled. Long day. Victoria smiled back, then became serious. He also told me he followed your lead. Gabe watched the floor numbers descend. He followed the problem. There is a difference? There should be. The elevator opened into the lobby. Outside, Mission Bay was nearly empty. Streetlights reflected off the pavement. Gabe reached automatically for his phone to check transit times, and Victoria noticed. I'll have a car take you home. He hesitated. For almost 2 years, he had been the one waiting at the curb. All right, he said. 20 minutes later, Gabe sat in the back seat of a Creston Pacific sedan, driven by a man named Luis, whom he had met several times at the transportation facility. Luis glanced in the mirror. Daly City. Daly City. Then, after a pause, Luis said, Heard you moved upstairs. Gabe laughed softly. Temporarily. Still counts. Gabe looked through the window as San Francisco slid past. He expected the back seat to feel like proof that his life had changed. It did not. It was just another seat in another car. That realization settled him more than any title could have. Thursday's partner summit began at 10. Gabe presented the compatibility issue in 7 minutes. Ethan explained the mitigation plan. Paolo joined from Cebu and confirmed that his team had completed the revised simulation successfully that morning. The partners accepted the launch date. After the call, Ethan remained beside the screen while everyone else began leaving. The dinner, he said. Gabe stopped. Ethan looked uncomfortable in a way Gabe had never seen before. I thought inviting you would be funny. I know. I was wrong. Gabe waited. Ethan did not decorate the apology. Not because you turned out to know more. Than I expected. I was wrong before any of that. I made someone else's job into a reason to treat him like a prop. Gabe studied him. That was closer to the truth than any apology Ethan could have offered about being embarrassed at dinner. Thank you for saying it, Gabe replied. Ethan nodded once. Then he pointed toward the screen. For the record, I still think your dashboard has too many thresholds. Gabe smiled. And there he is. They walked out together. The launch was still weeks away. The 90-day assignment was not even halfway finished. Nothing had been permanently resolved. But Gabe no longer needed every moment to prove that something had changed. Some changes were strongest when they stopped requiring an announcement. By the 7th week of Gabe's assignment, nobody at Creston Pacific referred to him as Victoria's driver, unless they were explaining how he had first joined the company. Even then, Gabe noticed the wording changing. At first, people said, he used to be the CEO's driver. Later, they said, he came over from executive transportation. The second sentence was not necessarily more respectful. It was simply less interested in turning his past into a twist. Gabe preferred it. The Cebu pilot went live on a Monday morning at 5 hours Pacific time. Because the operating team in the Philippines was already deep into its day, Gabe arrived at Creston Pacific before sunrise. The strategy floor was dim except for the conference room, where Maya had arranged 3 screens, one for live schedule exchanges, one for operational metrics, and one for the video call with Cebu. Paolo Serrano appeared on the largest screen wearing a headset and a Creston Pacific polo shirt. Good morning, California. Maya held up her coffee. Debatable. Gabe smiled. How does it look? Busy, normal, which I will take as a compliment. The first scheduled transfer entered the system at 5:08. The second followed 9 minutes later. By 6:30, 13 messages had passed without a compatibility error. At 7:04, one shipment missed its planned handoff window. Every head in the room turned toward Gabe's dashboard. The indicator changed from green to amber. Maya whispered, "Here we go." The cause appeared 2 minutes later. Not software, not a flawed model. A truck had reached a receiving point later than expected because the previous loading sequence had taken longer than the historical average. The old reporting system would have recorded the delay as 12 minutes and moved on. Gabe's model showed what happened next. Because the truck missed a specific warehouse window, the cargo would sit for nearly 3 hours before the next receiving slot. A 12-minute delay had created a much larger operational consequence. Ethan entered the conference room just as the amber indicator turned red. Problem? Gabe pointed to the screen. Useful problem. Ethan stared at him. Only you would say that before breakfast. Paolo's team adjusted the next sequence. The cargo entered the later window without disrupting the following transfer. Elena calculated the cost impact and added it to the pilot record. Nothing catastrophic happened. That was the point. The system had noticed a small issue early enough for people to respond before it became a larger one. By noon, the pilot had completed its first operating cycle with 2 missed handoffs, both identified and managed within the thresholds Gabe and Maya had designed. Victoria arrived carrying breakfast sandwiches no one had requested, but everyone ate. She stood behind Gabe's chair and watched the live dashboard. How do we know this is actually better? It was the right question. Gabe opened the comparison view. We don't yet. One day tells us the system works. It doesn't tell us whether it improves performance. How long? 4 weeks before I would trust a directional comparison. Longer before I would call it a trend. Victoria nodded. A year earlier, Gabe thought, she might have asked for a number by Friday. Now she asked, what should we watch until then? He showed her. That afternoon, Gabe took his lunch outside. Mission Bay was bright and windy. He sat on a bench with a container of pancit Liza had packed the night before and called his father in Cebu. The video connected on the 3rd ring. His father appeared beneath a ceiling fan, wearing reading glasses low on his nose. You look tired, he said. Good morning to you too. It is afternoon here. I have had time to become accurate. Gabe laughed. He told him about the pilot, about Paolo, and about hearing Cebuano in a San Francisco conference room while they tested scheduling messages across an ocean. His father listened quietly. Do you miss it? He asked. Gabe knew what he meant. Not simply Cebu. The work. The version of himself who once believed a career had to keep moving upward or it was moving backward. Some of it, Gabe said. Which part? He looked toward the glass towers, behind him. Solving something with people who care whether the answer is right. His father nodded. And which part do you not miss? Pretending every opportunity is worth the price it asks. That answer made his father smile. Then perhaps you learned something while driving. Gabe looked at the container in his lap. A few things. Good. Keep those too. After the call, Gabe sat outside for another minute. He had spent years separating his life into categories: engineer, son, immigrant, driver, analyst. Each category came with an imagined room and an imagined version of how he should behave inside it. The longer he worked at Creston Pacific, the less useful those divisions felt. His patience behind the wheel helped him in meetings. His engineering background helped him understand operations. His childhood in Cebu helped him ask better questions about regional assumptions. His years in the United States helped him see how easily people mistook familiarity for universality. None of those things made him complete by itself. Together, they made him Gabe. That Friday, Victoria asked him to join a leadership meeting on the Manila phase. There were 12 people around the table. Gabe recognized most of them now. Halfway through the meeting, a senior manager proposed copying the Cebu launch process almost exactly for Manila. It worked, the manager said. We should avoid reinventing what we just proved. Gabe felt an old instinct surface. 2 months earlier, he might have waited for Ethan or Victoria to ask his opinion. Instead, he said, I don't think we proved that. The room turned toward him. He explained that Cebu had validated a framework, not a universal operating sequence. Manila's volume was larger. Receiving schedules differed. Partner capacity was not identical. Copying the pilot too literally would turn learning into dogma. The manager pushed back. Gabe listened. Some of the pushback was right. He adjusted his recommendation in real time, keeping the principles that held and changing the pieces that did not. By the end, the team agreed to preserve the dashboard and readiness thresholds while rebuilding the operating sequence around Manila's actual conditions. After the meeting, Victoria caught up with him in the hallway. You changed your position in there. Part of it. You didn't seem bothered. Gabe looked at her. Being wrong about a piece of something doesn't make the whole person wrong. Victoria stopped walking. For a moment, neither spoke. Gabe realized the sentence had landed somewhere beyond the meeting. She gave a small nod. I'm learning that. So was he. The old Gabe had sometimes protected his competence too carefully because he thought losing an argument meant losing his place in the room. The new version was beginning to understand something quieter. Belonging did not mean never being corrected. It meant being allowed to stay after the correction. The first time Gabe drove Victoria again, neither of them planned it. It happened on a Thursday near the end of his 10th week in strategy. A transportation scheduling error left Victoria without a car for an afternoon meeting in Palo Alto. Her assistant discovered the problem 40 minutes before departure and began calling the executive transportation desk. Gabe was standing near Maya's desk reviewing Manila readiness data when he heard the conversation. I can take her, he said. Maya looked up. Are you serious? I still have the credential. That is not what I meant. Gabe understood. For weeks, everyone around him had treated the driver's seat as a symbol of the life he had supposedly left behind. Returning to it might look like retreat, insult, confusion, or some awkward combination of all three. To Gabe, it looked like a car that needed a driver and a meeting that needed to happen. It's fine, he said. 20 minutes later, he pulled the black sedan to the curb outside Creston Pacific. Victoria stepped out of the building, reading a message on her phone. She opened the rear door herself, looked inside, then looked through the windshield. Gabe raised one hand. Traffic is bad on 101. She stared at him for a second. Then she laughed. What are you doing? Preventing you from being 20 minutes late. We have drivers. Apparently not this afternoon. Victoria got into the back seat. For the first 5 minutes, the old arrangement returned so naturally that it was almost funny. Gabe knew which entrance she preferred at the destination. Victoria answered 2 emails. The city moved around them in familiar patterns. Then she put the phone down. This feels strange. Your seat has not changed. That's not what I mean. I know. They crossed toward the freeway. Victoria watched the traffic through the window. Does it bother you? Gabe glanced at the mirror. Driving? Being back there? After everything that's happened, he thought before answering. No. Why not? Because the job was never the problem. Victoria looked at him in the mirror. Gabe continued. I was good at it. I liked parts of it. It gave my family stability when we needed it. The problem was when people decided the job told them everything worth knowing about the person doing it. Victoria was quiet. Including me. Including you. The answer no longer carried the sharpness it would have 2 months earlier. That surprised Gabe. Not because he had forgotten the dinner, he had not. But the event was becoming part of the story, rather than the story itself. They reached Palo Alto 6 minutes before the meeting. Victoria opened the door, then paused. Are you coming in? Am I needed? We're discussing Manila operating readiness. So yes. Gabe shut off the engine. Then I suppose I am. They entered the building together. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. When they returned to San Francisco, Victoria sat in the front passenger seat. Gabe looked at her. You know there is a perfectly good back seat. I know. Is this symbolic? Don't ruin it. He laughed and pulled away from the curb. Halfway home, Victoria brought up the 90-day review. 3 weeks left. I counted. Of course you did. She looked ahead. The board asked me what role I expect to propose if the review is positive. Gabe kept his eyes on the road. And? I told them I hadn't decided because I wanted to discuss it with you before designing your future without asking. That sentence mattered more than the possible title. Thank you. What do you want? For once, Gabe did not have an answer ready. He had spent the first half of the assignment proving he could return to technical work. The second half had taught him that returning was the wrong frame entirely. He did not want the consulting career he had left. He did not want to spend his weeks traveling endlessly. He did not want a role built around being the company's unexpected success story. But he wanted the work. He wanted difficult operational questions. He wanted the moment when incomplete information became a pattern. He wanted to build systems that helped people notice problems earlier. He wanted to work with teams rather than appear briefly, recommend something, and leave before anyone had to live with the consequences. "I want operational intelligence," he said finally. Victoria waited. Not a general strategy title, something tied to how the company detects risk, tests assumptions, and learns across projects. Small team. Real authority to ask uncomfortable questions. Clear responsibility for results. Reporting to whom? Gabe smiled. "That sounds like your problem." "Nice try." He thought again. "Initially, you or Elena. Not because I need proximity to the CEO. Because if the function is new and it reports too low, people will treat it like optional reporting. Once it proves itself, the structure can change." Victoria nodded slowly. "Director level?" Gabe did not answer immediately. 2 months earlier, the title would have felt like the climax. Now it felt like one design choice among several. If the scope is director level, yes. If it isn't, don't use the title to make the story sound better. Victoria looked out the window, smiling. "You are remarkably difficult to impress. My mother says I was an exhausting child." I believe her. The following Saturday, Gabe went with Liza and Marielle to a Filipino grocery store in Daly City. It was an ordinary family errand involving rice, vegetables, frozen lumpia wrappers, and a disagreement over whether Marielle had already bought too much calamansi juice. At the checkout, Liza asked about the job. "Do you want the permanent position?" Gabe placed a bag in the cart. "If the role is real." "And if it is?" He looked at his mother. "Then yes." Liza nodded as if he had confirmed something she already knew. "Good." Marielle pushed the cart toward the exit. That was disappointingly calm. I expected a speech. "You live with the wrong family," Liza said. Outside, fog was beginning to move over the hills. Gabe loaded the groceries into the car. Before closing the trunk, he noticed an old black jacket folded beside an emergency bag. It was one of the jackets he had worn during his first months as Victoria's driver, kept there and forgotten. He lifted it for a moment. Marielle looked over from the passenger door. "Getting sentimental?" "Checking whether I should donate this." "That is the least sentimental answer possible." Gabe smiled and folded the jacket again. He would decide later. There was no need to reject one version of himself in order to choose another. For years, he had measured important decisions by what they required him to give up. This one felt different. He was beginning to measure it by what it allowed him to keep. The 90-day review took place on a Tuesday morning in the same conference room where Gabe had begun the diagnostic. This time, no one needed to explain why he was there. Victoria sat at the head of the table. Eleanor was beside her. Ethan joined from the opposite side with a binder containing the Pacific rollout results. Maya had been invited for the first half because much of Gabe's work had been built with her, not around her. Gabe arrived with 4 pages of notes, not 40. That was another change. He had learned which details needed to be carried into the room and which ones could remain available if someone asked. Victoria opened the meeting. "This is a performance review, not a celebration, so let's do it properly." Gabe almost smiled. The written criteria from the beginning of the assignment were projected onto the screen: diagnostic quality, operational impact, collaboration, decision discipline, communication, and the ability to build repeatable processes rather than one-time solutions. Elena began with the numbers. The Cebu pilot had completed 4 operating cycles. Severe handoff misses were down 26% compared with the closest historical operating pattern. The new dashboard had identified 12 schedule problems, early enough for teams to adjust before they affected subsequent transfers. The 9-week stagger remained on track, and Manila readiness had improved without increasing the total implementation budget beyond the revised range approved by investors. "Those are team results," Gabe said. Elena looked at him. "Yes, that is why the category is operational impact. Not Gabriel Villanueva personally moved 12 containers. Maya covered process design. She described the handoff model, simulation procedure, and code compatibility checklist that had already been adopted by another Creston Pacific project, unrelated to the Philippines. Then she added, "He also finally reduced the number of thresholds on the dashboard." Ethan raised a hand. "I would like the record to show that institutional pressure works." Gabe shook his head. The room laughed. When Maya left, the tone became more serious. Ethan discussed collaboration. He did not pretend the first weeks had been easy. "We disagreed frequently," he said. "Some of that was because Gabe was returning to systems work after time away. Some was because he had incomplete knowledge of Creston's internal constraints, and some was because I was protecting decisions I had already invested in." He looked across the table at Gabe. "The useful part is that he learned the company without becoming afraid to question it." Gabe wrote that sentence down. Victoria noticed. "Planning to use it against us later?" "Possibly." Then came Gabe's turn. He spoke about what had gone well, but he also named 2 places where he thought he had underperformed. In the first month, he had sometimes built analysis too independently before bringing operators into the process. His previous consulting habits made him comfortable developing a clean answer first, but Creston Pacific's work improved when frontline teams helped shape the question earlier. Second, he had overcorrected against appearing uncertain. "I thought I was past that," he said. "I wasn't completely. There were moments when I spent too long validating something because I knew people remembered how I entered the team." Victoria did not interrupt. Gabe continued. "That got better when I stopped thinking of credibility as something I had to re-earn every morning." The room stayed quiet for a moment. Then Elena asked what support he would need in a permanent role. Gabe turned to the final page of his notes. He described the operational intelligence function he and Victoria had discussed. A small team responsible for cross-project risk signals, assumption testing, implementation diagnostics, and lessons that could be reused instead of rediscovered. He wanted Maya involved if she chose to move into the group. He wanted defined boundaries, so the function would not become a second approval layer slowing every project. And he wanted operating teams to retain ownership of decisions rather than having analysts arrive after the fact to explain what everyone had done wrong. Ethan leaned back. "You have been planning this." "I had 3 weeks." Victoria closed her folder. "All right." She slid a document across the table. "Director of Operational Intelligence, reporting initially to the CEO with a 6-month structural review. Authority to build a 4-person team. Scope across major logistics and infrastructure programs. Performance criteria tied to measurable implementation outcomes, not presentation volume or executive visibility." Gabe read every line. No one rushed him. The salary was more than he had earned as a driver, and less than the highest number he had once made in consulting after travel incentives. The difference did not bother him. The work fit the life he wanted better. He reached the final page. "I want my attorney to review it." Victoria nodded. "Expected. And Maya's move should be her decision, not part of my acceptance." "Agreed. And I want the 6-month review to include feedback from the operating teams we support. Not just leadership." Elena wrote it down. "Reasonable." Gabe closed the document. "Then, assuming the language matches what we discussed, I intend to accept." There was no applause. Again, he was grateful. Ethan reached across the table. "Congratulations." Gabe shook his hand. "Thank you." After the meeting, Victoria asked him to stay behind. She waited until the door closed. "There is one more thing." Gabe looked suspicious. "That sentence has not historically improved my life." Victoria laughed. "Dinner, Saturday, Aurelia House." He stared at her. The same restaurant, the same private dining room where Ethan had once expected him to become entertainment, and where Victoria had allowed curiosity to substitute for respect. "Who is invited?" "The Pacific team. Eleanor, Ethan, Maya, Priya if she can get back from New York. A few partners. Your mother and sister if they want to come." Gabe raised an eyebrow. "My family?" "Only if you want them there. The dinner is to mark the pilot and the new function, not to display you." He heard the care in the wording. Victoria continued, "And if Aurelia House makes the whole thing feel ridiculous, hell, move it somewhere else." Gabe looked through the glass wall at the office beyond them. He thought about the first invitation. Dress nicely. He thought about standing in his bedroom with the suit he had not worn in years, deciding whether to enter a room that expected him to be uncomfortable. Then he thought about Liza, telling him not to confuse an open door with an obligation. "Keep the reservation," he said. Victoria watched him. "You're sure?" "Yes." He smiled slightly. "But this time Ethan doesn't choose the seating chart." From the hallway, as if summoned by accusation, Ethan's voice came through the glass. "I heard that." Gabe laughed. Saturday arrived with clear skies over San Francisco. At 5:30, Gabe stood in his apartment adjusting the cuff of a charcoal suit, while Marielle inspected him from the doorway. "You know," she said, "the first time you went there, everyone was shocked because you looked different." Gabe checked his watch. "Apparently." "Think they'll be shocked tonight?" He looked at himself in the mirror. Same face, same steel watch from his father. Same man who had once waited at a curb at 6:45 because doing a job correctly mattered even when no one was watching. "No," he said. Marielle smiled. "Good." Gabe did too. For the first time, that was exactly the point. The doors of Aurelia House opened at 6:58 on Saturday evening. Gabriel Villanueva stepped inside, and nobody stopped talking because they failed to recognize him. The hostess greeted him by name and led him toward the private dining room. Through the glass, Gabe could see Elena near the windows, Maya laughing at something Priya had said, and Ethan adjusting place cards with exaggerated concentration. Victoria stood when Gabe entered. So did Liza. His mother had chosen a deep blue dress and looked far more comfortable in the room than Gabe had expected. Mariel sat beside her, already in conversation with Maya as though they had known each other for weeks. Gabe looked at Ethan. "You touched the seating chart." "Only to protect myself from your sister." Mariel pointed across the table. He put himself 6 seats away. "Risk management," Ethan said. The room laughed. Gabe took his seat. There were no speeches before dinner. Victoria had asked everyone to keep the evening simple. The Pacific pilot had completed its first month. Manila's launch was scheduled for the following week. The board had approved the new operational intelligence function, and Gabe would begin permanently on Monday. Those facts were enough. Conversation moved easily around the table. Paolo Serrano joined for 10 minutes by video from Cebu, because the time difference made attendance impossible. When his face appeared on a tablet at the end of the table, Liza immediately greeted him in Cebuano. Paolo laughed. "Now I understand where Gabe gets the direct questions." "From his father," Liza replied. Gabe translated for the table. "She is protecting her reputation." Later, Priya asked Liza what Gabe had been like as a child. "He took apart a broken electric fan at 11 and could not put it back together," Liza said. "Most of it went back together," Gabe protested. "Most is not the standard for a fan." Maya laughed, and Gabe accepted the family story with a smile. At the first dinner, every question directed toward him had seemed to contain another question beneath it. "Do you understand this room? Do you know these things? Are you what we assumed?" Tonight nobody was testing him. They were simply talking to him. After the main course, Ethan tapped his water glass with one finger. "I was told no speeches." Victoria narrowed her eyes. "Correct. This is not a speech. It is an operational exception." Gabe leaned back. "That sounds dangerous." Ethan stood anyway. He looked around the table, then toward Gabe. "A few months ago, I suggested inviting Gabe here because I thought the difference between his job and this room would be entertaining." The table became quiet. Ethan did not hide behind humor now. "That was an error of judgment, and I apologize to him privately. I am saying it here because the lesson should not remain private when the mistake was public." Gabe watched him carefully. Ethan continued. "The easiest version of this story would be that we discovered Gabe was secretly extraordinary. That is not what happened. He was competent on Monday before the dinner. He was competent while driving us on Tuesday. He was competent when I made the joke on Wednesday. The information available to us did not change. Our willingness to notice it did. No one moved. Then Ethan lifted his glass. So this is not to the surprise at the door. It is to better judgment before we need surprises. He sat down. Gabe looked at him. For someone banned from speeches, that was suspiciously organized. The tension broke into laughter. Victoria waited until dessert before saying anything herself. She did not stand. I have one sentence. Ethan looked offended. Unfair advantage. Victoria ignored him. She turned to Gabe. Thank you for accepting the second invitation, for the reason I should have given the first one, because I wanted you at the table. Gabe held her gaze. The sentence brought him back to that balcony months earlier, when he had told her there was a difference between being invited somewhere and being seen as someone who belonged. This time, he did not need to explain the difference. Thank you, he said. After dinner, Gabe stepped onto the terrace overlooking the city. Liza joined him, and Marielle followed with her phone. Dad wants a proper picture, Liza said. Gabe put an arm around his mother, while Marielle took it. In the photograph, he looked much as he had on the first dinner. Tailored suit, steel watch, city lights behind him. But the image felt completely different. The first time he had dressed carefully because he refused to become the joke someone expected. Tonight, there was nothing to resist. He was simply present. On Monday morning, Gabe arrived at Creston Pacific at 6:45. Some habits, he had decided, deserved to survive a change in title. His new office was small, with glass walls and 2 empty desks outside for the team he had not yet hired. On one wall, Maya had taped a piece of paper before he arrived. Operational intelligence underneath, in smaller handwriting, Maya 1, Ethan 0. Gabe laughed. At 7:02, Maya appeared with coffee. You saw the sign. I assume this is your formal application. My formal application has fewer facts. They sat down to review the Manila readiness report. By 8, Ethan had joined them. Soon, Elena sent a question about another project, and Victoria forwarded a note asking whether the handoff model could be adapted elsewhere. The work arrived quickly. That was fine. Near noon, Gabe walked downstairs to the transportation level to return the executive driver credential he no longer needed. Luis was beside one of the sedans checking a tire. Director, he said when he saw Gabe. Gabe made a face. Please don't start. Luis grinned. Gabe handed the transportation manager his old credential and signed the release form. Before leaving, he ran one hand lightly along the roof of the black sedan he had driven for nearly 2 years. He did not feel embarrassed by the memory. He did not feel rescued from it either. That job had carried him through a season when stability mattered more than status. It had given him time with his family and sharpened his attention. Most importantly, it had taught him that dignity did not arrive with a better title. If he needed the director role to prove the driver's work was worthy, he would have learned the wrong lesson. Gabe returned upstairs. In the elevator, his phone vibrated. A message from his father waited on the screen beneath the photograph from Saturday night. You look the same. Gabe smiled. He typed back, I am. Then he added, mostly. The elevator doors opened. Maya was waiting with a question. Ethan was arguing with a chart. Victoria was walking toward another meeting. Beyond the windows, San Francisco continued its ordinary movement. Buses stopping, trains crossing, cars lining up at lights, thousands of people going to work in uniforms and suits and jeans, carrying histories no stranger could see at a glance. Gabe stepped back into the office. He had not become valuable when the right people finally noticed him. He had not become capable when a CEO gave him a different desk. What changed was smaller and more important. He stopped measuring himself through the assumptions of the room around him. And the people around him learned to ask before they assumed. Sometimes a new beginning does not require becoming someone else. Sometimes it begins when a person finally understands that every useful part of the road behind them is allowed to come along.